Running Sentences presents Ghost Sands Part 3 Campgrounds. More research is needed by these two private supernatural paranormal detective workers, and as a result they find themselves under threat. This story is written and narrated by Michael Henry. It is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and situations within this story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, situations, characters, businesses, events, and/or fictional businesses, characters, events, and etc. is purely coincidental. Copyright 2024, Michael Henry. All rights reserved. Trusty had moved down the main street, desperately looking for a side road to make sure he was all alone. Nothing he saw met his satisfaction as he moved there. Ralph, though, was happy to hum along in the back of Trusty's mind, just sort of being there and making himself known. "Get out of here this instant!" "I will when I'm done. After all, who would want to be stuck in this run-down shape of a thing you call a body? We have work to do, though." What kind of work?" "The demonic kind. What else would I be talking about? I am one of those, just so you know. And don't think of going to church. The priests won't listen to you, and their spells to banish me from your body probably aren't strong enough. There might be one or two if they're smart enough, but in a backwater place like this, no." "I don't trust you to tell me the truth. You're lying to get me to do things, bad things that will harm people. I should go to church right now." "Of course, I want you to harm people if it gets me what I want. Then I do what needs to be done. Listen, Mr. Trusty, is it? Yes, that's what your mind says. We can do this many ways. I would prefer that you control things and simply do as I say when I say. It makes us all even. Otherwise, you'll just be along for a ride. And if we get caught, well, I'm not going to help you out." It was the late afternoon by the time Laura and Bart had pulled up the long driveway to the parking lot of the day camp. Theirs was one of a few cars, not many, and it didn't look like the camp was in session judging by how few there were. A large swath of green grass and several buildings around the grassy area were all that they could really see as they sat in the car. "Here lies a kidnapping site, right? A day camp where kids are never far out of sight. Did this happen during the day?" "Yes, this is where it happened. Now, it was not a daytime kidnapping from what the old news reports said. I think this actually used to be a sleepover camp." The cabin in the front of the parking lot, with a "Welcome to the Day Away Day Camp" sign on it, seemed a likely place to go. The door to it had already opened, and out had come two people, one holding a shotgun, and the other a female, looking rather concerned about everything that was going on. "Who are you?" They got out of the car. "Investigators working on a case which this camp was involved in." It took a moment, but the shotgun came up to point at them. The gun was cocked as the man stared down at them from the gun sights. "We don't welcome strangers here." "You don't welcome strangers to a day camp? Is it always repeat customers, even though the boys and girls may have aged out of going to such a camp?" "Yeah." "Well, you're welcoming strangers right now. We just want to talk." "We don't want to talk." Bart felt his patience beginning to wear a bit thin as he glared at the two. "Lower the damned gun and invite us inside." The two counselors seemed shocked and awed by this statement. The gun went down and the door was opened by the young lady to let them in. Laura shot Bart a look of "what the fuck?" "It's best not to question what I did. Trying to explain it tends to make people question all sorts of things. On a simple level, when I bark, people listen." "So you're not really human, then? Admitting to that?" "Part of me is. The rest of me is something altogether too weird for explanation. Shall we go inside, since these two are willing to let us inside?" She, though, stormed off ahead of him, since he hadn't really answered her question. The interior of the camp office was a decent one. It wasn't fancy, and it seemed to be set up in a way to make sure that kids couldn't hurt themselves in it. The counselors pointed towards a nearby couch for visitors to sit down on. No need for that, we're just seeking information on the kidnappings that happened many years ago. That happened here? Oh, goodness. No, miss, it happened years ago. A look of relief spread across this young woman's face. Oh, that's good to hear. This camp has already been through so much, and if it were to get into another controversy, well, it would probably close. What other controversies have happened since that kidnapping, miss? There was a look of reticence from the woman now as she looked back for her friend, who had gone to put the shotgun in a safe hiding spot in the back. He returned with a hurried step so that he could grab a hold of her. Kids missing, parents missing, horror movies playing up the fact that this camp was used by vile creatures of the imagination. It all adds up. Were these missing people found? For the most part, a few ran off to get away from their family and so on. At least 3 or 4 permanently gone, apparently. Why do you want to know this? It's our job to find out what happened and why. Well, we have a fear of a supernatural presence that may be at this camp, and that's what might be causing all of this. He said this in the same firm tone that he demanded the shotgun to be lowered. It was a command, and they listened and nodded along, accepting that such strange words could be true. Oh, is it dangerous out there, then? Well, yes, very, since you mentioned that parents are falling into this trap as well. Can you think of a centralized location of where these events might be happening here? The docks? By the beach. The docks themselves, or what is it? They waited for a second as the two thought this with a shake of their heads, yes and no. Bart took a moment to move about the office, looking for any further clues as to what else was going on here. It was a sparse space, though, with 2 doors leading to the back office and a desk to receive any visitors, with nothing much but a blotter on it. I think it was actually where the land meets the beach in the dock area. Does that mean anything to you, Bart? No, but probably means it's not the same group of demons, or it's a lone demon trying to break through the veil. So these crimes might not be linked, the original ones and the other ones? Yeah, there's a chance that our recently released prisoner might be innocent in this case, or it just might be a different demon picking up where the last kidnappings left off. It's all up in the air right now. Why would they leave unfinished work, especially if it were to break through? There was a pause, as the two simply thought about this, and then the young woman broke through. Can you explain what is going on, please? Oh, right. I don't know why they would do that, Laura, but to answer your question, miss, demons are trying to take over the world. Always have been since the day it was brought into existence, depending on which creationist myth you decide to believe in. Why would they want to come here, though? Creatures always want what isn't there. It isn't a human-only trait, unfortunately. And now we have to go exploring that location you said that was causing problems, if you don't mind showing us. The woman got up with a nod as the man eyed them carefully, and Bart grinned at him, knowing that the spell effect was beginning to fade on him. The pond was not much to look at, and the dock area with a few canoes and rowboats made it seem even smaller. Bart wandered on to the sound that made up this small area beach. That wasn't much of one. The woman and Laura stood off to the side, watching him as he walked about. I don't think I understand what is going on. Can you explain it to me a bit better? Laura at first opened her mouth to respond, but paused as she thought about this. There was no easy answer to give that would make any sense. Well, neither do I sometimes, miss. What is your name? I'm Claire. There is a case of a paranormal thing attacking our world, and it is our job to stop it. Can you stop it? Perhaps, but, we need to know what it is first, and, I think it will mostly be our friend out there on that beach stopping him, not me. What are you two going on about? Trying to figure out if this is the place or not. He leaned over to a spot where the ground met the sand and brushed his hand over the soil part. There wasn't any grass in this particular spot, and he actually picked up a fair amount of it fairly easily. If there are any marks like this one, then it is a spot where one might potentially be brought over or taken from. Then, well, none of it is this camp's fault, right? We can be free of any blame that is being put upon us? Bart shook his head no, while Laura smiled, trying to put a bright spot on all of this. It's hard to explain, but, are there any other spots where grass doesn't grow around here? There was a pause from Claire, but then she pointed off in a direction. Over towards the woods over there, I think there is one across the pond at the motel that also shares our lake. The camp shares a pond with a motel. Yes, we get one side and they get the other. It's a sort of sharing deal. The camp counselor turned to point towards the building across the pond that they could just make out. Having driven much of the day, the mysterious man, named Mr., brought the vehicle to stop at a motel. It wasn't special looking, and only had a nice view of a nearby pond to recommend it to anyone. Zevian got out of the car and looked about for an answer that had been promised to him. Mr. had gotten out and then come around and pointed towards the door with the number 2 on it. This way, answers will come, though if you would like to enjoy a look across the pond, feel free to do so. What's across that way? Their camp, I believe, or something like that. We use it from time to time, as does another party, to bring us some happiness in our work. You're a demon, right? Well, what does a camp and a motel have to do with you? Oh dear. It's a place to cross over, much like your home was, and probably still is. This sent a shudder over Zevian, who didn't like the sound of that sort of thing, especially since he was completely unaware of how or why it might be happening, and how it had happened to him. There were, as far as he could remember, no haunting or weird sounds from his home, and that would be a sign of such things, right? It was a new place when it had been built, and the grounds weren't over a graveyard or anything like that. How did it happen to my home? Oh, it's a chance encounter with a line that crosses atmospheres and dimensions, I guess. Yeah, I wasn't briefed on why it was that way. You would have to ask our friend. Just that your home was a good spot to make a move. And so our demon friend did exactly that. You'll meet him if you go into the room number 2. There was an air of mistrust about this that Zevian was quick to pick up on. This creature wasn't telling him the whole truth about what he knew, and he would have to be extra careful as he turned to look at the motel and began the short trek up to the door he'd been pointed to. The interior of the motel room was not pleasant, as it stank of smoke, even though there was none to be seen. Instead, there was a seedy-looking man in a black suit and a hat ripped somewhere out of the 1940s and plopped down here upon its head. He sat at the table and hadn't looked up as Zevian had walked in and now was approaching him. "You're the demon in charge of all of this?" "Yes, I am. Malphus the Destroyer is my name. You may or may not have heard of me, as I am rather forgotten about in the books of the world." "No, I haven't heard of you, sir. Why did you choose me to do your work or whatever it was?" That's simple. You're weak. You're a soul looking for purpose and for someone to tell you what to do. And I'm just the perfect one to do it, I guess. Zevian was unsure how to feel about these accusations against his nature. They certainly weren't true at all, according to him, But then again, these things had reportedly happened to him, even though he had no memories of so-called events. So what do you want me to do now, Go back to kidnapping kids, supposedly? There was a cackle of a chuckle from this figure. All you will do is ask of you without these questions. This only led to more questions that welled up inside of Zevain, and he wanted to let them out, but each time he tried to speak, words failed to him, and Malthus had stood up and waved his hand, a feeling of everything going numb coming over Zevain. Now I have some stuff to do, and so do you. Return to your home and wait for word on what to do, okay? There was a nod as this strange man who called himself Malthus disappeared into a misty sand that just fell onto the floor. Trusty had made his way to the one place he knew well, the grocery store parking lot. He sat down in a spot near the entranceway with his cardboard sign asking for help. What are you doing? If you want to move around here, Mr. Ralph, it's best to catch a ride instead of walking, though you haven't told me where we are going yet. Well, I don't know either, but it is for a particular person that stands out to me. I'll know them when I see them, but for now, it is best to move around and see things, okay? Sitting around doesn't achieve that. Walking around doesn't get us anywhere either, fool. A car had pulled to a stop near the front entranceway, where there was a light to the exit and the parking lot. It was idling there, waiting for the light to turn, with its window down and a rather beat-up state looking like it was about to fall apart. Inside the vehicle, though, was a rather prim-looking lady and a young man. Trusty recognized them in an instant. Preacher Abbott, how are you? The preacher looked over from the driver's side as Trusty got up and waved to him. Oh, hello. Hello, Trusty. Ma'am, you two getting food for the social coming up, or just, the usual run of keeping supplies stocked? Oh, it's the usual supplies, Trusty. The man kept her eyes on him in a distrusting manner. Trusty knew that he'd never done anything to this Judy, but she always seemed to have an opinion on him. Well, whatever it was, it didn't matter much. If he could wiggle a ride out of this preacher who has a soft spot for people. He offered a bit of grin to Abbott, purposefully ignoring her. Did I hear you talking out loud to someone, by the way, just a moment ago? Oh, yes and no. I've got a creature in my head who says he's a demon of some sort. Judy recoiled in horror, but making a sign of the cross, and then keeping 2 fingers crossed, and pointed towards Trusty. It's a good thing our church doesn't deal with exorcisms. Now, dear, we have talked about this. Those aren't real, and the man likely has a mental disorder, and we need to treat those types of people well. A nice meal at the parish should do him right. No, it won't. My father always told me those who talk to themselves are evil sinners who shouldn't be trusted. Do you trust this homeless fool? Of course not, dear, but I can't leave us all out here to starve and make a mess of themselves. As God's children, we must look after those in need. In your church, yes. My old church, though, would cast away those with differences in a heartbeat. But you do as you wish. However, it is you taking care of that one. I'm not touching it or helping with anything. Abbott smiled to Trusty and made it come inside to get into the car. Ralph was pleasantly surprised by all of this, and after a moment, the fear about the preacher had gone through him. He figured it was okay-ish. It was still susceptible to the words of God while on this plane of existence, but they weren't going to push him out easily, and even if they did accomplish such things, at worst he'd have to find a new body to play with. And if that was the case, a preacher might actually be a nice tool to use. Preacher Abbott, if you're okay with all of this, You are of my flock, even if you do not attend my church. Trusty reached for the door handle to the back passenger door. Some food sounds good right about now. Ick. Darling, they need help, and it is not an icky thing for them to want food to survive. This only earned the preacher a glare from Judy as she settled sullenly into her seat and did her best to stuff up her nose in a pointed way. Trusty knew he didn't exactly smell fresh either, but never did anything about it since he was going to be dirty anyway when he got back to the streets. With the light turning green and he had settled into the car, they drove off for the short drive to the church house. Stepping outside of the hotel room, Zevian found a mostly empty parking lot to the motel. There were no signs of the mysterious mister who had brought him here, nor his vehicle. The place felt cold with a breeze coming off of the pond that made him shiver. To fight this off, he wound up going towards the lobby area, even though he had no money to pay for any rooms. His hands patted his pockets just to be extra sure of this, and they came up empty. Still, it might be a little warmer in there, and it would give him time to process what was going on. He, however, only got to the door as he was looking about when he saw two people scrambling about the shoreline, with a third trailing behind. It was an unusual sight to see. What are you doing on the property of a motel? You can't just wander around here. He had no idea if wandering about the beach area of the motel was in fact prohibited to just guests, but it felt right to yell at them. There was something distinctly off about their appearances, and the way the man, as that group, kept looking about the ground. Apologies, we will only be a moment. We're looking for something we lost. No intruders on private property. His hand reached for the door to go into the little check-in lobby area while still watching them. The little group seemed to actually ignore his words as they went off a bit further down the small beach area. Move on already! He watched them just keep doing what they were doing. Zevian entered into the lobby with almost a bit of a harumph. It was a small space, and he was almost instantly at the check-in counter. Behind it sat a tired-looking man with a stained undershirt and no shirt over it. His wiry hair and cheap looks underscored the sour smell of the room. Can I help you? Yes and no. How much for a room for the night, and if I told you my name was Zevian, would that mean anything to you? The name drop did actually do something, as the man seemed to brighten at the name. Zevian hadn't actually expected anything from it, but with the hope against hope that the demons would at least be nice and give him a place to stay for the night, well, it seemed it was paying off, and that was, at least until he could find a way to get home. I remember something about that name. We have a room saved for them or something, paid up in advance, and more than necessary. Excellent. Please look over your books and give me that key to me, then. The hotel worker looked dubiously at him. The matter was settled when Zevian showed his old driver's license, and he found he had room number 2, so he set off for that one. At the home of Abbott's, Trusty found himself in the kitchen, trying to help out. Judy had refused to do any of the work with him around, which was fine by him. The downside of it, though, was that the preacher would moan about it. Oh, preacher, thank you so much for all of your help. Of course, I'm glad to help, even though my wife tends to create such a scene about it. Things haven't been well for her lately, as you know. We're trying things out, but nothing is The words were like magic to Ralph's ears as he listened into this conversation. Two souls who were a bit weak and easily manipulated because they were wanted. Something that they couldn't have. They would be prime jumping spots, though he would prefer if it were the preacher he could jump to. Human males tended to be a bit stronger, and magic cast through them was, as a result, hit better. But he'd take what he could get if it would get him away from Trusty. Abbot, I have a confession, and I don't think you will like it, but I think you can help. Oh, what is this now, Trusty? The preacher looked over to see confusion and horror crossing the face of Trusty. He took a step back, since it felt like dark shadows were playing across the old, homeless man's face. I think I've been possessed, and the idiot told me how I might be able to get it out of me. It's a simple process, too. All I need is for you to read certain segments from the Bible, and poof, out they will go. Can you do that? The preacher was at a loss for words. He'd been trying to cut vegetables when this came upon him, and he gave an almost bewildered look to Trusty, who offered a grin in return that seemed to curl up in an evil fashion. I don't do that kind of thing, as my wife said. Who even is inside of you, if you don't mind me asking? I don't know. Well, he told me a name of, Ralph? Well, no, actually he told me not to tell you. Yet he's telling you all of this. What are you going to do to help me? Trusty was flailing his arms about, going all around the place. The preacher, fearing for his life now, made a sign of the cross and began muttering a few of the Lord's prayers. He didn't seem to be getting much of an answer from Abbot, though, and since there was not much of an answer, Trusty switched his attention to his inner thoughts. What are you doing, Ralph? You said you wanted me out of here. Here's your chance for you to be free. Do you wish to take it or not? Yes, then how do we do it? I already told the preacher how. He has to do a little song and dance of reading out of his little Bible. Do that and you'll be free as a bird. Why are you telling me this? It sounds like a lie when you told me not to try anything. I'm only offering you a way out. I'll be leaving shortly, as soon as the preacher believes in me. If you don't want anything to do with this, then just sit still and be in the back of your own damn head. Trusty's body suddenly shook for a second, and he sprang about, kicking his left leg one way and his right leg kicked out as his arm waved to and fro for a moment. It settled down, and now he looked to Abbot. Well, Mr. Abbot, I'm a demon you seem to be afraid of at the moment. Shall we fix that? Stay back. I will get out my book and I will expel this thing from you and from this world if I have to. You don't want to? Wouldn't that make a nice big name for yourself in the world of religion? Confirmed demon pushed out of the body of a human, and all he had to do was read a good book. Doesn't that have a nice ring to it? This sounds like a trap, Trusty, and not something a demon would advertise to the world. I won't do it. If you don't, then bad things will happen to all of you. A demon would say that as well. I curse you and demand you to leave in the body of Trusty. I do that, he dies. It takes an awful lot to get a demon out of a possession, and the only surefire way to do it is by the good book, I'm sure you know. Come now, come on. You know you want to save souls, you love Trusty. Your chance is here to be amazing and save the world. Preacher Abbot was torn between running away and doing the right thing. His face twisted with emotions, mostly that of fear and questioning what to do. Honey, is everything okay down there? I heard some loud voices. Do you want your wife to be right? That something was wrong with Trusty? My book is in the next room. I'm going to grab it. Don't try anything, demon Ralph. I wouldn't be a demon if I didn't try things. The preacher was beginning to back out of the room, still holding his fingers up in the sign of a cross. Then he was gone, and a moment passed before he returned with the promised book and a glare of an expression on his face. Ralph, though, was grinning from ear to ear, enjoying playing with his little puppets. Honey! Everything is fine, dear, just complicated and demonic at the moment. You might need to come down from upstairs and help me if you can. Yes, good. The more people that watch this, the better it will be for all of us. She has a phone with a camera, right? Record and let the world know that us demons are here to take over. Get your phone, dear. I don't think people will believe us in the moment. Abbott shook his head, trying to clear it as he said this. There was confusion in his mind and his face as he felt something was off. Ralph didn't want him to figure it out, though. A spell against a human can only last for so long, and he'd done his best to make sure that the human was hooked onto its tentacles. He looked to the doorway where the wife was now beginning to appear from. What is going on in here? Your husband is doing a demonic intervention. It will make you and him famous for all the world to see. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that what you've always wanted? What, huh? Fame, fortune, popularity, so on. Don't listen to him, Judy. We need to free Trusty from the grips of a demon. Just get it on camera so we all have proof that something occurred while I recite random stuff from the good book. There was a lot of page flipping by Abbott as he tried to find something good to read. Ralph waited for the words to hit him as he smiled at Judy, who now held out her phone but wasn't paying the least bit of attention to it. She was instead staring at Trusty, mesmerized by his eyes that just kept them staring. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? Words now out of his mouth, Abbott looked up to the person who was Trusty. Nothing appeared to have changed. It's me again. Come on, you have to do a little better than that. Yes, husband dear, please do better. A confused glance over towards his wife left Abbott with no clear answers as to why she would say such things. Then he went back to look for something in the book that might help him out. Page after page went by as he looked desperately for some grand line to say that would end all of this. Better hurry. I feel Trusty's life is beginning to slip away. And then what will you do? And if by Beelzebul I cast out demons, by whom do your sons cast them out, so they will be your judges? Beelzebub? Really, that weak old fool? Better than nothing, I suppose. With that, Ralph threw back Trusty's arms and began emanating a bright, brilliant glow of yellow-white light that encompassed the room in a second. It took a moment, but they found the last spot that had been cleared out and felt unnatural. Bart was knelt over, feeling the soil run through his fingers in the dim light of the cell phone that Laura had provided. Not our group who set this up. As he stood up, though, he felt himself stiffen and look sharply over his shoulder. There was a strange feeling that something otherworldly was going on in that direction, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. Something wrong? Demons might be up to something over in that direction. Can't say for sure, don't know what it is, though. Some sort of possession, if I had to guess, of some sort. Should we be concerned about that? I can't get a read on where it is, so even if we could get over towards it, I don't know what we would find, or if we could even be a help. Best to retreat and see what happens. Laura was quick to collect the concerned Claire, and they began moving out. The yellow light, which had overtaken the entirety of the kitchen, bathing Trusty, Abbott, and Judy in it. A moment later, it began to fade, showing the three of them on the ground, unconscious. Ralph was in an ethereal form, floating like a gaseous cloud above them all, grinning to himself. Stupid fools, a trap is what you walked into, and you saw it coming. Now which of you will do to help me out? He tried looking over them, but another flash of light overtook the room, blinding him. A screech of pain that was in his throat felt caught there, unable to escape, as things suddenly felt like they were pulling him heavily downwards. In a blink of an eye it was gone again, and he found himself staring at the ceiling, somehow, having taken up a body. Oh, well, I guess I don't get to choose, then. As long as it's not Trusty, then it should be fine. He sat up in his new body and looked downward with a frown. Well, I'd hoped I would be a preacher, stronger-looking body, but oh well, women have their innocence and abilities to confuse things, don't they? Slowly getting up, he admired the new curves for a moment, before looking at the other two. They remained lifeless on the floor, looking useless to anything. He wondered if they were dead for a moment, but remembered that the spell he'd cast did have a habit of killing all living things within a radius if he didn't jump into a body. It made it easier to take over, or something like that, he'd been told. He didn't bother with the little ideas, but made sure he went over and prodded the bodies with his foot. They moved, but with a lifelessness to them which made him grin. But now what to do? People would ask questions when the preacher stopped holding sermons, so... Realizing he still had the cell phone in his hands, he hit the end record button and then brought up the cell phone buttons, quickly hitting a few numbers and then putting in the phone to his ear. "Hello, police. Something has happened in my home, and 2 people have appeared to have died." "Okay, please explain what has gone on. Are you okay? Is someone attacking? What is going on?" "I don't know. I came into the kitchen after being called in by my husband, the preacher Abbott, and everything was fine until a flash of lights, and now they're dead." "Who else is dead?" "I think his name is Trusty, a homeless man who came in for a meal." "Okay, I'm dispatching the police and the EMTs to your home. What is your address again?" A moment of panic shot through Ralph as he tried to think up the address. The woman's memories weren't coming to him at that moment, though. "Oh, ow, I'm so sorry. I have a headache. I can't recall. Oh, this horrible thing has occurred, and oh, God." He hit the end call button and sat down to wait the madness that would come. Burke awoke from his meditative state and stretched out, looking at the dark interior of the work shack. It had been built to get out of the sun and give a bit of quiet to whoever was there, and a bit of authority to them. But it was quiet, which meant work wasn't being completed, and if there was one thing Malthus hated, it was failure to get workers to work. In a moment, he scrambled up, looking for his associate Ralph, who wasn't there, and led him to charge out of the hut to find him. Sand was blowing hard when he stepped out and looked about the mining operation. There was supposed to be children working away during all conditions, but nary a cry of pain or grunt of frustration was to be heard, nor could he see or hear any children around the grounds. Frustrated and fearful of something happening to him because of this, he ran towards the mine entrance. Even though he'd been busy helping out on another plane of existence, this still was going to come down on him, more likely than on Ralph. But he could swing the blame towards Ralph if he worked this correctly. Unlikely, though, in this situation, since Malthus liked to blame whoever was before him. Inside the actual cave, the wind had died down, and he could see the huddled masses of children not far deep into it. With a growl, he began marching towards them. "Who told you that stopping your work is fine?" One of the bigger boys stood up and began approaching. Not wasting a moment, Book swung his arm at the boy, his clawed hand greeting the face. The boy recoiled in pain, but said nothing as he flew across the cave to try and get away from any further strikes. "Work in the caves if you can't work out there. The master's orders stand. Work." Once they began to move to get back to work, he hurried his way along towards Malthus's section of the cavern. The flashing lights of the police cruiser and ambulance could easily be seen from the kitchen of the Abbott's home. Ralph sat in Judy's body, pretending to have failing for words, while she was able to say that she was fine. The EMTs had already moved both Abbott and Trusty out of the room, leaving it just to them, which was not exactly what he wanted. There was no sign of foul play that anyone could see, and no one could explain anything to anyone. 2 officers stood before Ralph, trying to get a semblance of something out of him, while he did his best to hide his growing smile and wishes that they would just go away. "You said that there was a bright light, and then the 2 simply fell over. Forgive me for asking for the 20th time, but that sort of thing doesn't happen." I don't know what I can tell you, officer. I woke up after a flash of light, and they were dead. And then I called the cops as soon as I realized what had happened. The two officers shared a look, saying they didn't believe this, but sighed and went along with it. They had nothing to go on, which is exactly what Ralph was after. Unfortunately, Miss Abbott, you can't stay here since it is a crime scene, as you claim. There's a local motel not far away you can stay at. Officer Douglas here will take you there. The officer in question began helping her up and towards the door, which Ralph did not resist at all. End of Part 3 of Ghost Sands. Thank you for listening.